AI opens up new risks, obviously new potential, or we wouldn't be talking about this. But the fact that it can do things a lot faster, but has absolutely zero common sense, like it's not going to say, hang on a minute, no one should know unless you tell it not to.
Yeah.
And that's where governance comes in.
Welcome to the Power of Construction recording live here at Groundbreak. My name is Brett King, and I'm filling in for you, your usual hosts, Sasha Reed and Chris Langiza. Everyone's talking about AI in construction, but the real issues are tougher. Who owns the intelligence it creates? Whose data powers it? And who is responsible when AI is wrong? To dig into those questions, I'm joined by someone who's been leading this conversation for a number of years. So Hugh Seaton, author of Construction Technology Handbook and host of Construction Futures podcast. So Hugh, it's great to have you here. So let's jump straight into it.
Yeah, great to be here.
All right. I think just setting the scene, we'll start off with a little bit of governance. And it's not the flashiest topic, but it's become a real battleground. So when we think about ownership, accountability, and trust, the question is who's got the latest tool, but who's leading on governance? So Hugh, my question to you is, why is governance so critical right now?
Yeah, AI brings in a new level of governance. In the past, when we were talking about governance, we usually meant cybersecurity and ownership and so on.
Yeah.
But there's another layer here, and that is that when you're using especially generative AI, the content of what gets produced, it also itself needs to be governed. Like AI is probabilistic. It's not going to do exactly the same thing every time. So putting guardrails around what data you put in, otherwise known as context. So if you haven't heard the term context engineering, you're going to be hearing it more and more. That's kind of the game when it comes to making agents or even chatbots and so on work well, is that you're governing what it's looking at. And that can be a couple of things, the quality, but also are people seeing things they shouldn't see? There was an early example of one of the chatbots that was connected to email, and people hadn't thought of the fact that a chatbot can read everyone's email in a meaningful amount of time, not 10 years. And they found that there were things that people were discussing in their emails, their salaries. So something that should be really governed and controlled, anyone could find out. Not everyone's salary, but so what? They could find some of it. So that gives you an idea that AI opens up new risks, obviously new potential, or we wouldn't be talking about this. But the fact that it can do things a lot faster, but has absolutely zero common sense, like it's not going to say, hang on a minute, no one should know unless you tell it not to.
Yeah.
And that's where governance comes in, is saying things like, make sure, and this is what system prompts are. So for those of you who don't know, all chatbots behind the scenes have what they call a system prompt. And that's where the rules are to, not do bioweapons or whatever. But when someone like a Procore creates anything with AI, there'll be a system prompt that you don't see because it's just baked in. And it'll be things like what we're talking about now, like things like don't talk about, or if somebody asks about damage to a building, or somebody asks about salaries, don't answer it or report it, but that's really up to you. So my point is, governance now, you always had to worry about who owns it, what risks is it creating, but now it's not just where the data is going, but also is it answering questions in a way that you don't want? And that's not always just as risky as it's not always as catastrophic as you might think. It might also be like, hey, can you make a recipe for rabbit stew? Well, I don't want that from Procore, and I don't want Procore to have to be responsible for that. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So it opens up almost an unlimited number of things that a system could do. And to do that, you say, well, okay, let's open up what it can do and if not, don't do that kind of thing. And it's harder to do than it sounds. It takes a lot of testing. It takes a lot of evaluation. So a term also you may be hearing more and more about is evaluations or evals. Takes on a whole new meaning when it comes to AI because it has so much power that it can do things you didn't expect it to. So subject matter experts, and that means you guys. That means people that are in the field, the actual users of the content have to be evaluating it, not just software engineers. From the past, when you were doing testing, software engineers were enough because you want to make sure the pipes work. But now is it producing things that are appropriate and correct? One last example, and I'll give you back the mic. If you think about how many ways you can install duct, this came up literally yesterday with one of the associations. They've got a 700-page book with ways to install a duct. Well, a lot of those answers are almost right. And if you haven't put in governance to make sure the question is being clarified, that you're giving the AI the right context to give you the right answer, there may be 30 answers that are almost right.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just laughing because we say we'll pull this back to time, but we know we could probably talk for 2 hours on this topic for sure. But you mentioned their ownership, and I think I want to dive into that a little bit. So when data flows into shared systems, it's, well, who actually owns it at the end of the day? So owners and GCs, they want visibility, but it's a subto generating the most information. And contracts are still catching up. And the way we handle this could make or break the trust on projects. So my question to you today is, in today's projects, who really owns the data?
Yeah, well, you mentioned contracts, and it comes down to that. Yeah. I don't know that there probably are cases out there that help guide this, but it's not a legal thing in the terms of a law defining this, at least as far as I know. This is where it's good for everyone to think about. Unlike the past, where the data that we produced, we used it in that project, and that was, other than some, maybe we think about what just happened, or we have a meeting about how we can improve. The data you're producing has value that it didn't 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So when you're in contract negotiations, this is another factor that you can either, get that right, or at least it's a chip that you give up and get something else. So it's a concern that wasn't there before. And I think that you're not probably going to win the argument that we as the contractor should have rights to the design. I think that's a hard one. Yeah. But the outputs of our own team, we should own. And one of the ways that, you'll hear people say, yeah, but we want to be able to take that and do better designs. Well, there are licensing structures that are not very complicated, where you say, we as the contractor own the data that our teams produce, but you as the owner have a perpetual license to use it in certain ways. So it isn't that complicated to do that. IP lawyers are not something this industry has had a lot of experience with. There's a lot of good ones out there. You don't have to go to one of the big firms. There's a lot of good IP lawyers. Strongly encourage folks to, when you're ready for it, go talk to one. I also find that IP lawyers tend to be unusually business focused compared to some other lawyers who were like super risk averse. Yeah. Of course, every lawyer is going to be risk averse. Yeah. But most conversations I have with IP lawyers go to earning money faster than other ones do, which is refreshing. Because usually it's like, no, you can't do this, you can't do that. They'll tell you how to do it. So my point is, there are licensing structures that are not that complicated, where you could say, yes, you guys can use this. Now, frankly, most architects and even owners probably aren't able to do very much with it today, but they may be thinking, well, yeah, but in 2 years, we've got a pilot underway, blah, blah, blah. We're going to want to have access to historical. So the point is, you can, I think there's structures, I know there are structures where you can retain ownership of what your teams produce. And that's true for subs as well.
I'm just thinking, like, I've heard terminology that's like the Wild West out there with data and things like that. And I don't know, how do we get that structure in that data that's existing?
How long do we have? But what you're seeing a lot of is, both on the contractor side and on the software side, lining up how people enter data. So if you go back 5-10 years, so much was handwritten or just written free form. Yeah. It's tough to do a lot with that, right? I mean, generative AI can sort of summarize, but you're not sure that it's like against like and so on. Because at the end of the day, what you want to be able to do is aggregate a lot of things and say, here's generally what's going on, and here's how we can, improve. So the first kind of line of defense is how data is being entered. And this is probably not the first time you're hearing that. But then the next one after that is, are we putting it in places where it's organized? So like how it gets gathered, how it then gets kind of pulled into somewhere, where it's being stored. I mean, a couple of years ago, there was a lot of talk about data lakes and data warehouses and data lake houses and data condominiums, it seems like. And there's value in that. I think it's a lot less mystical than it might have felt a while ago. And I think you probably don't need to invest early as much as people might have thought. Yeah. But nevertheless, being thoughtful about the kind of chain of where data starts, where it goes, what happens to it, and then how you can access it later. And there are some things you can do now to say, how would we use this? Whereas it might have been a little harder before. Yeah. We probably know that we're going to want to look at it. We're going to want to run analyses against it. The question you'd ask is, do I need to do quantitative analysis, in which case everything kind of has to be in the same kind of format and labeled the right way and so on, or are we going to put generative AI to summarize it? And that'll depend a little on what you're doing. If it's something you do an awful lot of, you want to be quantitative, because you want to be able to say, statistically, we do this. And if it's a little bit more ad hoc or more about conversations, then you can't be quantitative, but not really.
I was on a panel, this is a couple of months ago, and I'm someone who believes collect as much data as you can because you've got it, you can do something with it. And the lady I was on the panel with, she said, like, oh, I only want to collect the data that I need right now. And I was just trying to get your where would you be on that? Would you be like, collect what you should, or collect everything you can?
So you want a good perspective on too much data? Talk to a facilities manager who gets dumped at the end of the job, like lots and lots of data that's operational and isn't really relevant to operating. So I had one of those moments where the guy's like, I don't need a terabyte of data upon your RFIs.
Yeah.
Like maybe some of the change orders, very much maybe. So I think, you have to ask, what are we going to do with this? And what is there even a mechanism to do? I mean, there was a moment during the big data, like 20 years ago, talk about dating yourself, where everyone was like, just collect it all, you'll do something with it. And when you're talking about clicks on a website, maybe. But when you're talking about all of the complexity of what goes into the early phases of a job and the mid phases of a job, you have to ask, where are you going to use that? And are we ever going to use that?
Yeah.
And I think that's not a question that I think a data scientist can answer alone. I think that's the operating teams and the contractors themselves have to think about, in the next 3 to 5 years, where do we think we're actually going to do anything? And even if you open that up and say, we've got definitely, maybe, and then if we have money and time, that's still a finite universe. And you can say, all right, well, these are things we can do something with. It just helps you to know how you're going to use it instead of thinking, let's collect it all, because then you have the problem of doing something with it and organizing it.
Or just storing it. The cost of keeping the data at the end of the day is huge.
The storage on its own is right, but a bigger deal is organizing it into that storage, so it's not just a lake.
Dumping ground.
I mean, lake implies you just dump water into a hole.
Yeah.
And that's actually not what we want, right? You want to have, and that's not how good data lakes work anyways. You want to have some way of organizing it, understanding what it is. And that takes real effort. And usually it means you're paying someone outside of the organization, because most contractors don't have data scientists on staff. So, being realistic about what you're going to do, that's why people are sometimes pessimistic or cynical about big promises of technology, is that to really do this takes a lot of implementation and a lot of work.
I want to move on to, you mentioned IP, this was early on, but builders, we talk about secret sauce, so they have their methods, their know-how, but with AI and connected systems, that edge can leak out unintentionally, and the industry needs to protect everyone, so what makes firms unique. And how should we protect builders from giving away that competitive edge, that secret sauce?
Yeah, I spent some time in another industry that isn't the same, but it has some similarities. Yeah, so it's advertising, and there was always this sense that each agency had some competitive edge over each other, and actually it boiled down to people. So the entity itself probably had some secret sauce, but that's really hard to keep, to be honest. And that's not about AI. That's about people leaving their job or about some reading a thing or whatever. I think to the degree there's secret sauce, comes down to your people. It comes down to who you're hiring, who you're training, who you're nurturing, and who you're actually giving the ability to do their best. So I'm not sure I would worry as much about losing your secret sauce as enabling your secret sauce, as saying how do we have that 45, 50-year-old who really knows how to do this building type. How do we capture what that person's good at in a way that can be transmitted to others? Now, the reality is you can't transmit judgment. You can't transmit the kind of the secret sauce that's in a human mind. However, there are things that you can, whether it's through interviews, whether it's through, actually interviews are a good one. I spent some time at CSI, so I'm kind of biased towards using maybe a spec book as a way to spur someone to say, oh yeah, that's when you need to worry about this. It's kind of like lessons learned, but maybe a little more structured. That to me is an interesting way to do that, is not just to make that individual better at what they do or more able to do what they do, but also to share that when it's relevant. People are too busy to go and read long manuals, and sometimes you have to in the beginning of the job, but the reality is everybody's behind. So I think being able to organize those lessons learned against a project and say, look, similar projects, or when we've installed that thing, or when we've dealt with this sub or whatever it is, that's where I think AI can help, because it can read what you've written and say that looks relevant over there, and it's not always going to be right, but it's a whole lot better than Control F.
Yeah, it raises the conversation for me where do you ring fence it versus like the open AI, like it's out in ChatGPT, or is it in your ring fenced environment? And there's arguments for both, isn't there? So like sometimes you want it in your own because it's your own data, but sometimes you want the wider picture. I don't know. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I have a pretty strong view on that. And it's because AI has gotten, the models have gotten so good. You don't need the top of the line from 99% of what you're going to do. So you can get an open source model, but also you can just have it privately hosted.
Yeah.
So you can go on Amazon, you can go on Azure, you can go on Google, I'm sure, and have it privately hosted so that your data isn't even in the same bucket as anyone else. So that's not as easy to do right away. So I think the way to think about it is as your organization is learning and on your own saying, hey, I think we can use it here, or we can use it here. And that's really hard to do externally. It's really hard for someone to come to you and say, I've looked at all of your process and I think they can give you suggestions, but at the end of the day, you know what you do and you know where your blockers are and so on. So my point is, in the beginning, sure, use ChatGPT and you can turn off data sharing, you can do a bunch of things, so it's really not a risk. The other thing I like to point out is that AI is not learning while you're using it. This is a misconception that's out there. So your data isn't being used to train it right away. They go and collect data, and then once or twice a year, they train the model, and then they give you the model. So the model you have is not being trained while you use it. This is something that I've heard people say, and it's maybe in the future, but not right now. My point is, in the beginning, learn with the open models, and then when you're ready for prime time, think about private hosting, think about it being part of a system that's got controls for you. Private hosting is not that hard to do, and it's getting easier really quickly.
Yeah.
And
cheaper.
And definitely cheaper. That's right. So, and again, doesn't mean you has to be on-prem, although I have a feeling that in the next 5 years, a lot of contractors are going to say, I want my own on-prem servers with a GPU or two in it. We can run our own AI right here. It sounds like it's really magical and hard, and people are doing it already. Not a lot of them, so don't feel like you're behind. But I do think that you're going to see that come back. I think that the cost of GPUs that are good enough for what you need to do are probably already achievable. And certainly in the next couple of years, they'll definitely get there.
I think this is all boiling down. We're doing this to build the trust around it, isn't it? So what signals show that sort of data lineage is reliable? So building that trust.
So the term data lineage comes from deep learning, which is a kind of a generation before what we're using now. I mean, you're using deep learning all the time, but you don't know it. It's usually baked into something. And the idea of data lineage is understanding where your data started. I kind of hinted at this earlier, where your data started and knowing what happened at each point. Now, most software has tooling in it that the software owner can use to say who clicked what and what happened where. So this stuff isn't that new. Applying it to your data means I can say that this statement, this data point, this bunch of data points started here in this system. We did this to it, we did that to it, and here's where it is now. That's important because you know that you want people working with the data. And by working with it, they might change it, they might add to it, they might transform it, but also who did it? Was it someone internally? Was it not? And this kind of intersects with the IP question.
Yeah.
And it certainly can. So knowing where your data came from, what happened to it, and where it is now is going to be important. And again, it's not as hard as it sounds. And to people that don't do this for a living, I don't do that particular thing for a living. It sounds really complicated, but the tooling is already there. It's up to the owners of the company and the IT team to say, this is worth investing in data lineage so that we can say, we know where all of this came from. I don't know that that's a litigation problem right now. It might be a good thing to think about for the future, that as you use more AI, you'll be able to trace back and say, actually, the owner said this in this meeting. You can kind of do that other ways, but data lineage just adds another layer of understanding and of traceability.
I think so. Like companies that the mature companies, they've got a good grasp of this. But I think looking at the bigger picture, do you think there should be any sort of legislation or what's the governance around that? Do you think there's something more that needs to happen from a regulatory point of view? Or
no, it's really early. I think that we don't know where the risks are.
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of abstractly say where they might be, but I think the government getting involved this early it's premature for sure. And I'm not sure the sorts of things that the building industry does, whether it's on the design, contracting, subcontracting, and facilities. I'm not sure that the things we do, the government should get too involved in. Possibly on the liability side, maybe liability limitation.
Yeah.
But the point is that's kind of covered in contracts.
Yeah.
So I think the burden is more on us, on people doing things to say, where do we think there might be risk? And what a lot of contractors did when ChatGPT came out is just lock it down, and that was absolutely appropriate. We don't know what this is. We don't know how it can go wrong. And I don't have the time to spend a week to figure it out. Let's give it 6 months or a year, however long it was. I hate to say it. That's actually a good approach, is to say, let's slow down, understand it a little bit, do some pilots, maybe whether it's a consultant or coming to a ground break, to learn more about this and understand it at the ground level, because that's where the risk will come from. I think it's easy to talk about big picture things, but at the end of the day, it's going to be one person using it inappropriately, or the big one is trusting it before it's ready. What scares me most right now is, people that just came out of high school or college that use ChatGPT a lot in school, which of course everyone's heard about, and they think I can dump a spec book in here and get a good answer. And the problem is, you're going to get an answer and it's going to look legit.
Yeah.
But it won't be complete. It probably won't have made anything up anymore. That's not, it's solved, but it's less true. It's not going to be complete. And more importantly, it has no idea what anything means. Whereas a human is just going to say, wait, that doesn't look, I just saw that. So it won't connect dots unless you ask it to. Whereas a human, we automatically will connect dots. So even an untrained human is going to do a better job if you have the time. The reason AI helps is you get a lot more time out of people and they have time to think about things. So there's definitely value. But the key is to say, have we done what we need to do to trust this? And okay, here's where we trust it. Or here are the guardrails. An example is, if you gave a spec section to ChatGPT, it might probably, depending on the question, it probably would do an okay job at pulling out submittals or whatever, because it can handle like 10 things. But there's a lot of submittals in a real project, and it's never going to give you a list of 1,000 or 700 things. It's just not built for that. So I think the biggest risk right now is that people trust it before it's ready.
I mean, and there's examples. We were talking backstage about the famous one. I had never heard about it, but the husky versus wolf, and it does go wrong.
There's a really good TED talk from like 2018. So this isn't even talking about chatbots, but it's a good example of how AI thinks really differently from how we do. And AI looks at everything as data. It doesn't know what anything means. So if you look at a picture, you're looking at the subject of the picture. You're looking at the person or the tree or the dog, and you're vaguely aware of the background. Well, AI doesn't distinguish between the two. So it's very common in universities when they're training people on how to build a deep learning model, is they use dogs, because there's a really good data set out there. So they'll say, take 1 million of these labeled data dog photos and create an AI or model that can distinguish dog breeds. So they found this one project that kept getting huskies and wolves confused. They called all of them one or the other. I can't remember which. And they're like, a human would say, well, they look alike, like the nose and the eyes and the whatever, because we're focused on the foreground. We're focused on the subject. Humans are based on meaning and what stuff means to us or our company or whatever. And AI has no mechanism to know what anything means. It just does statistics on what it's been given. What turned out that most of the photos of both huskies and wolves had snow in the background. So it learned from what it was shown. It said, well, obviously everything with snow behind it is let's say a wolf. And the point here is that we don't always know where bias comes from. In popular conversations, we always think of bias as being about humans. It could be anything. It can be the data, you didn't even realize it, but the data had a lot of this in it, and it drew a statistical kind of correlation between everything that has that thing. And you're like, just because there was a DeWalt hammer in all these jobs doesn't mean that's their fault. You know what I mean? Hopefully there's no one from DeWalt in the audience. But you get my point, is that you wouldn't even notice that, because you're focused on what the work was or whatever the subject is. And the bigger point is, because AI fundamentally works differently for humans, we are not always going to know in advance where it might go wrong. And if you hired somebody, you're a human, they're a human, you can guess why they might get something wrong, and you can train them for it, and you can give them guardrails or rules or whatever. And AI, you can get a long way doing that, but you have to know there's some risk that you're going to not know, which is why pilots make sense, which is why, trying things out for a while makes sense, which is why talking to a customer success team for a while makes sense, so that you can get a sense of, we trust it here and we're going to use it here, and then we'll grow.
And doing all of that, it comes with where does it start? So I'm going to just jump into the leadership piece. And I just think, what one step should leaders take today to prepare for governance challenges?
I think the first thing is an easy one. Start using ChatGPT for your personal life. Like what are we doing this weekend? It's low risk. It's, or how can I bake this? Or how can I, what about an optic for my rifle? I'm talking about my own book here. but it'll start to give you a sense of where it goes wrong. And you're going to find sometimes it's really good at finding things and it's really bad at drawing conclusions. They're often really obvious or not always wrong. They're just not very insightful. Like that's one of the things that I find once you get past using it and getting comfortable, you start to realize that a lot of its conclusions aren't very deep yet. And some of that is what you're pointing it at. Some of that is how you're asking the question, but it doesn't matter. The bigger point is, and it can do really great things. It's just, you got to really massage it. The point is, the first thing is get an intuitive personal sense of it. And the easiest way to do that is free ChatGPT, and use it for your personal things, like with a birthday coming up, or what are you doing this weekend, or where am I going tonight, or whatever it is. And then go from there. The other one is most companies that offer this are happy to have a conversation with you, whether it's as customer success or whether it's as someone else. The point is they're all in the beginning of an adoption process. I mean, this conference is going to be heavily about education of AI, thus this podcast, right?
Yeah.
So that would be the other one, is talk to people, because both there's a million forums, there's a million groups, there's a million masterminds or whatever it is in construction where other people are doing things. That's the other one, is just talk to people and have it be part of the conversation.
I love that. So it's like learn it yourself, so build your own trust in it, and then educate yourself further. That's kind of a good summary, isn't it?
I think if people can't connect it to their own experience, it's really hard to truly trust it. But also, people are senior for a reason, other than being older. And that is they have good intuition and good judgment about how things get built and how teams work. So that intuition, it's not just about risk. It's also about creativity. It's also about saying, you know what, this has been bugging me for 10 years. Let's try it there. So the unlock here is, once we've gotten past trust and understanding, is to start to get creative and say, AI isn't one technology on any sense of the word. It's more like a new way of thinking. It's a new type of, I don't want to say new type of trade, but it's a new type of resource. And the real value comes in saying, we could plug it in here, here, and here, and let's not do it there yet because I don't feel comfortable. That's where because a lot of the unlocks are going to be little things. There will be some big ones for sure, like design or review or whatever. But there's a lot of little ones. There's a lot of things where it slows me down when I have to think about how to write an RFI. The number of times I've had people come to me and say, can you make me an RFI writer? Because people hate that.
Yeah.
You can do that. Yeah. And it'll draft it for you. It's not going to do the final draft. That's fine. But it does it's 0 to 1. Like it'll get me a draft and then I can be an editor. It's a lot easier to be an editor than to be the first writer. Yeah. So that's my point, is that intuition isn't just about risk. It's very much about adding value and saying, I know how my business runs and I know where I want to take it. And I think that AI can fit in here, here, and here because I've got an intuition for it, not just I saw somebody speaking on stage.
Yeah. Brilliant. Love that. Time for a little bit of fun. Every time we host these podcasts, we end up with some rapid fire questions. So I'm going to rattle a few off to you. First one. What book would you most recommend? Now, you can definitely recommend your own. I'm okay with that, but I'm going to ask you for a second then.
Yeah, if you want a good sleep, my book is amazing. That's my dad joke. Co-Intelligence by Ethan Mollick. It's an easy book. He's a guy who also I encourage you to follow. This may even be the next question. But a guy I encourage you to follow on LinkedIn as well. He's out of Wharton, but he's very pragmatic about how he thinks about AI and work.
Yeah, great. Brilliant. What is your go-to source for gaining a different or more informed perspective?
Yeah, two. One of them is that guy, Ethan Mollick. Yeah. So it's Mollick. The other one's a guy named Nate Jones. So he's out of Seattle. He's a little bit nuts, which is fun. Energetic. He's not really nuts. It's just, he's into it. But very smart. I don't know how the man has enough time in the day. He's got kids. Anyway, but he dives into things right away. So Mollick is going to be more useful for how you can use AI in work. He does more than that, but that's where you're going to find it. Nate Jones is really on the cusp of what the model makers are doing today. So it's usually not technical.
Yeah.
Almost never technical, but he's going to be kind of where it is now and how to think about the news you read yesterday or the announcement you heard 2 days ago. But also he does like 2 things a day at least. He's on Substack, he does YouTube. But he'll talk a lot about what this stuff really means and how to practically use it. So folks that are in the work doing this, it might help you to use things more effectively. And folks that are leaders, you might listen to it quickly and shoot it off to someone on your team.
If you could give your younger self one piece of advice, what would that be?
This is going to be funny. I would have said, learn to code. And it's, wait a minute, they can do all the coding. Not really. So the reason I've tried it a few times and I never gave it the time it needed. the structure of how software works isn't going away as a skill. It's kind of like, we used to say, learn the liberal arts and it'll teach you how to think, even if you can't write. I think understanding, actually any engineering, but software engineering specifically, because it just teaches you how things really work. And as someone who's built software with actual developers, that alone has helped me enormously. So that would have been one, is at least learn HTML.
Okay, what's one trend or innovation that you think will shape the future of construction?
Robotics.
Robotics.
Yeah, I think that the things that make humans really special aren't going to go away. I think that moving things around a job site, some of the dangerous and dull things you hear about, I think that you'll see robotics make some real strides. I think that when it comes to putting work in place, we're a long, long way from trusting AI and or robotics, because the two are very overlapping right now. But there's still a lot of things that happen on a job site that if we had more bodies to do them would help.
Yeah, and if you just think like exoskeletons, it's extending the life of people's kind of working on sites. It can help them, and it augments people, even if it's not just about replacing them, is it? So
the exoskeleton thing for me is a little different, because I think that's more like safely letting people work on a job site longer into their lives than their knees would otherwise allow. Yeah. Like I think there's a safety component to that. That's pretty. I don't know that we're near there. Okay. I think the exoskeleton thing might take a little while to figure out. Yeah. I do think you're going to see more robotics useful in more places. Right now, the big thing with robotics is they're really bad at messy scenes, and that's kind of what the job site is going to be unless you clean it up. So that's why you see layout robots, because you had to sweep a floor anyway. So it's a very clean, easy scene, and you can't do that most of the time. I think that as they get more sophisticated, maybe it's a lay down yard, maybe it's somewhere else. I think you'll see more and more of it. On the logistics side, for sure, I think that robotics will help.
Okay, last one. If construction as an industry had a tagline, what would it be for you?
Don't worry, we're getting it done.
I love that. Yeah. And we are, indeed. All right, that's brilliant. Well, thank you everyone for joining us here at Groundbreak. Please like, subscribe, and share, and we'll keep bringing you the stories of leaders harnessing the power of construction. And thank you very much too.
Okay.
Great.